Hello, and welcome to Beyond Damascus, the show where encounter meets mission. On today's episode, the guys sit down and discuss discerning staying in your current mission field or leaving for greener pastures elsewhere.
So what are your guys' thoughts on Monopoly?
Monopoly Go or Monopoly Deal?
Monopoly.
Or straight
regular Monopoly by the Parker Brothers.
Which version?
I've never completed a game of Monopoly.
Which flavor? Star Wars?
Ever, I
No,
don't
just
think.
regular old Monopoly, Aaron.
Bible-opoly?
That probably
Plastic figurines or metal figurines?
They have a Portsmouth.
Catechism-opoly?
They're both. There's the houses in the hotels were made out of plastic.
The credit card version or the cash
I
money
hate,
version?
honestly, Monopoly is not exciting enough to spend as many hours on it as it did.
You're just not playing it right then.
You've just never
it.
gotten the straight up ownership of the blue side of the board.
I
It could
guess
be
that's
user
true.
error, but
It
I've
could
never
be.
completed a game of Monopoly either. That's what I was saying.
It is very difficult to complete a game of Monopoly with my children. It's as well
yeah.
like, whew,
Oh, that
man.
might be your children
That's
issue.
it's a family concern. We're working on it, but
The trouble is Monopoly, like there's so much setup for the perfect conclusion.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Risk. Like you have to play the early game in order to get to the end game.
Yeah.
And the end game's where the fun happens.
I feel like as a kid, we never actually played Monopoly properly either.
No one does.
Yeah. I think if I actually played a real game of Monopoly where you follow the rules,
Jack, we should do a Twitch live stream.
I'll do it.
Of a straight up Monopoly game.
I want to play.
We could do it on this table.
Yeah.
I like that.
Your new cameras could probably do the
Twist.
trick.
A Twitch?
a Twitch.
Twitch is a gaming
Yeah, I know.
streaming service.
I about said twist, and maybe I don't know why that was, but
Oh man,
there we are.
Jack,
What-
do we have a question today?
Yeah. Question of the week is how
Question of the week.
Question
Thank you,
of
Jack.
the
the
week.
week. Just stab and twist it.
the branding, Aaron. How can I discern between situations where I should stay and try and bring about change and those where leaving is the healthier option?
Okay.
Yeah.
This is
Stay
a
and
challenging one,
advocate
right?
for
Because I
change
bet
versus
people
leave.
go through hard situations where like, I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, I bet so too.
All right, who wants to give their 2 cents
I think
first?
I will. My 2 cents.
Brad's been here quite a few times.
Yeah. That's
the
true.
number of times we've had to pull you back off the ledge.
Yeah, it's like, come on,
I
Brad.
don't know. You started staying at Damascus or leaving? Was this asked by a Damascus missionary?
Sometimes I do feel typecasted by the questions. It's like we asked this question because Brad's answering it. No, I want to go with the route of know yourself. So I think it's great across the board, but I think especially in a situation like this where you're discerning, should I stay here, double down and continue to do the work, or should I go somewhere else where it might be more fruitful or more enjoyable or something like that? I think in making that decision, if you don't know yourself, you won't know how to challenge the proclivity you might normally have. And I can maybe give this from my own perspective because I think it'll make it more digestible.
I'd rather you give it from a different perspective.
Well,
From my
yeah,
own
just-
perspective.
I wish I
Is
could
it possible
find
to not give something from
I
your
don't
own
know.
perspective?
Yeah, because you can project onto someone else what they might be experiencing, right? But I think for me, it's a constant battle for me to know that whenever I find myself in a situation that is challenging or in a situation where I can't find resolution, my natural proclivity is to double down. And so like, even if I'm in an argument or something like that, it's hard for me to leave the argument. Like I want to constantly come back and back and back. I don't want to walk away and then readdress later. And because I know that proclivity in myself, when I am thinking of doubling down, I just do a second check of what I'm really intending to do. And what that allows me to do is ensure that I'm not just reacting to things, but responding to things. And so whatever situation that you find yourself in where you're asking this sort of question, hey, should I stay here and double down, or should I go find somewhere else that might be more fruitful, enjoyable, or effective? Ask yourself, what if I was just reacting to this situation, what would I normally do in a situation like this? Would I normally escape and leave, or would I normally double down and become the martyr? And when you know what your proclivity is, you can then, if you find yourself leaning towards where your proclivity's at, you can ask yourself, am I sure? And then if you're leaning away from where your proclivity's at, which I think happens in Christian community all the time, you can ask yourself, am I just doing this because it's against what I would normally do? Or is it actually what I'm called to? So it sets you up for a question of discernment that I think sets you up for success.
Nice. I like that.
Brad, did you know that you said the word proclivity 7 times that time?
Did you count?
How do you spell proclivity?
Can I fact check that? Is that real?
I mean, I can't fact check it right now because
It
I
may have
didn't
been
count.
Proclivity is Proclivity.
What's the etymology of the word?
I don't know.
Let me affirm your thought. So Father William Slatter, he's our chaplain here at Damascus. He will often share that it's impossible to exist in today's Catholic culture without being influenced by today's secular culture. So I think as you are knowing yourself, it's also really important to understand that the proclivity of
I was about to use it as soon as you were done. I was going to use it.
of our culture is oriented right now in today's world toward like self-care. You owe yourself health and well-being, and that like other people's stuff needs to get out of the way so that you can take care of your own self and your own thing. So while I totally agree with you about the know yourself, also be aware that yourself is already influenced by a culture that kind of encourages, would it be inappropriate to say weakness? Like
No, I don't think so.
an inability to stick it in, like stick it out and do the hard work.
Yeah. It encourages disconnection.
I mean, and clearly not only knowing yourself, but knowing what God's asking you to do in those situations. And I think that's where once you know yourself, oh, okay, this is a tendency. Now I'm asking God, how do you want me to act in this tendency?
Yeah.
I see you do this all the time, Brad. Like you've grown a lot in this and that, like, well, you and I both do this. We have a tendency to dig our heels in and fight for our position. Yeah.
What?
yeah,
No one would ever admit.
I'm right, no matter what. And so, but then that tendency, we've both gotten to the point of okay, wait. Once we get to digging our heels in, like, wait, is that actually what's best here? And does God want us to dig our heels in here or not? And so I think being able to see that tendency about yourself and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I tend to think I'm always right, or I tend to dig my heels in when people disagree with me. And so how do I respond if that's a natural tendency?
Yeah, it also allows you to discern honestly, like to your point, because if I don't know which way my lens points, I'll have trouble discerning if it's God or not.
Yeah.
But when I first get that out of the way, then all of a sudden I'm bringing my full self before the Lord, and what I hear I can trust in a different way.
Yeah. All right, I'll do my 2 cents. I'll add a little icing onto Brad's cake. I'm going to try to flip like Aaron. Oh, dang
Nice,
it. This
nice.
flippage
That was really
is actually
close,
kind of
Dan.
challenging. Okay, there you go.
Whoa.
I have
First
a
one.
proclivity to enjoy.
I have never used the word
Personal.
proclivity in my entire life. And so
I don't think
I
that's
love
true.
it.
Yeah, I
Brad.
keep
I
it.
encourage you to continue to use it.
It should be used 8 more times.
I'll read from Matthew 11. Jesus, he says, "Come to me, all who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I ponder this scripture account a lot because a lot of times in ministry we give a call to self-sacrifice, right? And so it's like this lay your life down, self-sacrifice. And Jesus is saying, yeah, but my yoke is easy and my burden is light, or come to me and find rest. And I think there is the yoke is easy and the burden is light when that yoke fits you perfect, right? And so the idea of this account is that if the yoke is put on the ox's shoulders properly, or if you're yoked together side by side and you're sharing the burden with Christ, then the yoke is easy, the burden is light. You're able to plow through the fields very easily. And so when you're asked to sacrifice for something you're called to do, the sacrifice is easy. It's easier, right? When you're called to sacrifice for something that you're not called to do, then that burden is very heavy. And so I think this question is, do you stay or do you go? The question really is, well, what are you called to do? And coming to an understanding that God's inviting you into something. And I would even say, look at the passions of your heart, like an Ignatian style of discernment is like, what are the desires of your heart? What are the passions of your heart? Where's their consolation and where's their desolation? And there should be consolation in the field that you're called to, right? And maybe there's desolation in the work that you're doing or in the interpersonal relationship that you're having, but there should be consolation in the fact that, yeah, God has called me here and God has given me the grace to accomplish everything he's called me to do here, right? And so if you're lacking consolation there, in the realm of the call, in the realm that God has given you grace to accomplish what you're called to do, that may be a reason to say, okay, am I actually called to this? If you have desolation and like, man, I really am frustrated working with Aaron, or I'm frustrated working with Brad, like then instead of leaving because you're frustrated with working with Aaron or Brad, then instead maybe I should say, hey, Aaron, I'm a little frustrated with where our relationship is.
Yeah.
How can we work on that? Because I feel called to be here and I feel called to accomplish something.
Got a couple good ideas.
This relationship, thanks, yeah. And so I think those being able to kind of evaluate where's the grace, where's the consolation, where's the desolation. For me, an example of this would be like, I like to say like, where do I feel most alive? Like what really revs me up and gets me excited? So one of my early discernments was between like when I was 18, I just got done serving as a missionary with NET, and I had signed up to study theology and catechesis at Franciscan. I had a roommate set out, my, Amber, who was a girl I was dating at the time. Like she was going to start going to Franciscan. So like things were like, every reason to go to Franciscan was there. But when I was invited to actually like go to Ohio State and live on OSU's campus and start a St. Paul's outreach household there and to do mission on campus at Ohio State, the idea of ministry and mission at Ohio State was so much more exhilarating than the idea of studying theology at a Catholic university that was so established. And so what brought me to life was, wow, I can't wait to be on mission at OSU. I can't wait to be around that surrounding. And then all through OSU, or all through my college time, it was life-giving. It was exciting because I found myself in the environment that gave me life. Mm-hmm. Whereas a Franciscan wouldn't have been an environment that gave me life. And so being able to discern, I'm going to go to the environments or the places that really truly give me life, as opposed to going to the places just because that's what I'm supposed to do. And then I think in that, once you're in that environment, really saying, okay, if there's desolation now, why is that desolation? And am I still called to be in this environment and thrive here or not? Realizing you're different, know thyself, as you said, mm-hmm. Brad. So some people are called to Franciscan because that environment is what's going to give them life. Some people are called to a secular university because that environment's going to give them life.
Yeah. I think similar to how Aaron kind of added some nuance to what I was saying. I think just to what you're saying, Dan, I completely agree, but it's also important to note that what brings you the most life isn't necessarily what makes you most comfortable. And I think that's a good distinction to make. And it's been funny as I've been kind of wrestling with a variety of things in my life. I think maybe you're actually more comfortable when you're not alive. Like when you're dead, you don't have the pains, the challenges, the things ahead of you. You're just not experiencing anything. There's like a perpetual state of, but when you're honestly, it's an interesting psychological reality, but one of the reasons we know we're alive is because we face challenge. It's because we have wind in our face when we're going running. It's because we breathe
just to know you're alive. Wasn't that a good?
That actually wasn't a song. I wasn't going to say that, but it actually fits pretty well.
Who was it? I don't know.
Should we test it out?
It's from the 90s. I danced to that in sixth grade.
I don't actually know. But yeah, I think you can see what I'm saying. And just I think there's
by the Goo Goo Dolls, Iris.
Thanks.
I would say I think that's true, Brad, but I do think there is
push back against it if you think.
Right now there can be a self-martyrdom mentality in the church where like, well, I'm going to prove my holiness by going and doing the most uncomfortable thing. And that's dumb if you're not called to it. So go where God calls you, and then and God will give you the grace to deal with the discomfort that comes. But if you're just going to prove yourself that you're holier than others, or that if you've bought into the lie that God only wants you to suffer, and that is what the spiritual life is, then we have to be careful not to buy into these self-sabotaging mentalities that sometimes our Catholic theology of redemptive suffering isn't actually redemptive suffering. It's just suffering for the sake of suffering.
Sure.
And so, don't just try to be comfortable, but also don't just walk into hell for hell's sake.
Yeah.
There's an equally problematic extreme on the other side, though, where I've seen a handful of times in ministry where an individual will say, I'm confident I was called here, but now I need to leave because I'm the victim of unfair circumstance. Right?
I think that's a dangerous mentality.
And you end up discerning a call from the Lord, and then in the context of the call, you leave because you feel like the Lord has now crossed the threshold that I can't tolerate anymore.
Yep.
Right, and it just becomes incredibly problematic outside of the context of actual discernment. I think I mentioned this on the show a couple weeks ago, that I don't believe God actually calls people to, leave a thing just because it's no longer good. But like if you're in relationship with the Lord, his call to mission is always a call to a thing, to an end, to a new experience.
It's onto something.
Yeah. So like you gotta be sensitive to being on mission with him. And when the going gets tough, there's a lot of ways around that. And the answer always isn't just like, do I stay or do I go?
Yeah. I also want to build out this tension point a little bit more, because I do think I agree with you completely, Dan. And I think it's the reason we find that so prevalent in the church, I think is because it's trying to swing a pendulum away from what we see in the world, which is this victim mentality that says, if you don't make me maximally comfortable when I'm in your presence, you're doing me a disservice. And that's just not true. Like, that's not true. Some of the most beneficial times in my life was when I was in environments where people actually weren't making me comfortable. Like, and I grew more there than I ever would have in a different environment. So we have to be careful not to play the pendulum game where in the church, we're simply swinging it as far away from what the world's doing as humanly possible. But I would say to Aaron's point, when he was kind of giving some nuance to my thought, don't think that you're not influenced by the world. Like, I see in the church a lot this victim mentality on all sides, where it's like, well, the particular liturgy I like is getting suppressed, or the particular way that I like praying is getting suppressed, and that makes me a victim because I'm not as comfortable. It's like, we should be really careful on both ends, not to play, I'm going to just die a martyr to die and be famous, but I'm also not going to be a victim.
All right, do it, Aaron.
Right. Get those cents 2 cents coming at you.
I missed the rebound. That's so
I think they both went in.
Yeah, great.
For those of you listening and not watching, neither of them went in.
And I tried
are we keeping score?
How can
somewhere?
I discern between situations where I should stay and bring about a change, or those where I should leave?
Yeah. How should I discern if I should leave this podcast?
Okay. I'm going to take this just a very practical route, because I have, unfortunately, in the context of ministry, just met a lot of people who are really unhappy with the place they are. And usually that comes about through an experience of kind of perpetual complaint or frustration or discouragement. And that's just not a fun place to be.
Lack of fruit.
I think that one of the marks to understanding, am I called to stay in this particular place or this particular assignment, is actually assessing properly whether I actually have influence here, whether I have the ability to have influence here, right? So let me give an example. Like, I feel like I want to influence my parish, and my parish priest doesn't seem to care what I have to say. So I'm going to continue to try to communicate my feelings, but I feel like they're falling on deaf ears. There's a lot of nuance there, and certainly there's influence to prayer and intercession, but it sounds like this person's probably in a place where their complaining doesn't help, right? You're not helping the situation, and there are certain circumstances that are outside of your control in this scenario. And if you actually feel convicted that like your voice needs to accomplish a change, it probably means that you need to be somewhere else, because you're in a scenario where you actually don't have the ability to influence outcomes, right? Now, that's an unhealthy place to be. And to continue to stay in that place is probably just going to make you unhappy and your supervisor unhappy, or the person you're trying to change unhappy. So the better scenario is to find a space where the gifts that you bring to the table are something that are appreciated and celebrated, even if there's friction involved, right? And to engage actively in a process where you can actually have a meaningful influence on outcomes. And in those types of scenarios, like it's then that you can actually influence change.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. I think that's a really good word. I think there are additional complications that could be invoked in that, but I think there's that's a really good assessment.
Yeah, and timing. I mean, I know I shared really honorably here on the show in the past about my last pastor who I served under as a youth minister before leaving parish ministry to come full time with Damascus, and Father Oakes was an awesome boss and really supported me in ministry. But there were a good couple of months where I needed to learn how to acclimate to his style of leadership.
Yep.
Right. Where I probably would have said out of the gate that, wow, I have no ability to influence outcomes in this scenario. And what it took was like us learning how to operate together. Mm-hmm. So yeah, don't make judgment too prematurely. But if you're in a place where like it's evident that these two realities don't align, you may just be setting yourself up for trouble.
Completely. Yeah. I also think, if I can expound upon knowing yourself, like also look at your track record. Like if you're always the one who's getting disgruntled and leaving,
which definitely isn't the person who asked this question.
Yeah. But the common, yeah, right. And it's never been me either. The common denominator there is you. Right. Like if you're finding tension everywhere you go, it would be a really good habit for you to ask, what might you be contributing to the tension? Yeah. I see this all of the time. It's this, I think because we have so many options in the world today, because of how expansive the opportunities are before us, especially in the Western world, we're always able to kind of window shop and go to the next thing. And if you're in your 10th thing in 10 years, you really should set yourself up to make a commitment to something for a period of time without giving yourself permission to move. Only because then you can really see what a year committed to something looks like, or 2 years committed to something looks like.
Well, I think just to testify too, that like, I think the tendency is, okay, I'm not bearing fruit, or this seems hostile. And so how do I deal with it? Well, I can't make influence, but, and then I leave. And I think there is, just to testify to our reality at Damascus, is there was times where we had in our early years, we had a lot of tension and a lot of difficulty, but it was like, kind of like the words of Peter, like, well, where else are we going to go, Lord? You alone have the words to eternal life. And we didn't feel called to leave Columbus, even though there was tension here in Columbus, and we didn't feel called to stop doing the work that we did. And so we persevered, and that perseverance actually gave us stronger character to deal with what God was calling us to in the future. Yeah. And I think there is, if you're in that time of difficulty, ask the Lord, because I think you said this a little bit earlier, Brad, like virtue is formed in the crucible. And so how are you growing me in this time of difficulty? And maybe I'm not called to leave yet. I'm called to persevere, and there still is an impact I'm making. And I think if we would have left, or we would have stopped, that the exponential impact today may not have. So it is careful discernment. And really, most of the problems I have found when I'm not making impact anymore, or the influence is not happening in a person's ministry, it's interpersonal, relationship wise. And so, yeah, like you said, like the pastor's not willing to listen to you, or you're not breaking through with the pastor and you guys aren't seeing eye to eye. So I'd say, have you done the interpersonal relationship work? That's great, Dan. That's great. To actually discern, like, have you had the conversation that's honest and straightforward? Like if it's an employment situation, like, hey, I'm not happy and I'm thinking about leaving because I'm trying to accomplish something and I don't feel like I'm being heard. Or if it's a campus ministry situation and the campus minister is just not listed, like, hey, I really want to be a team here, but that's not. Brad, you did it at Ohio State really effectively, where there was the administration at that time at Buckeye Catholic versus you, like your ministry and your call, there was a ton of tension. How did you bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think, showing up every day is part of it. And I think here's something that's a common thread that I think I can tie in here. I think this is a challenging principle for anyone, but don't give yourself permission to leave until you have peace. Like if you ever leave in a state of chaos, you probably weren't called to leave.
You should throw your books down. I'm done here.
Yeah, but every time, when I really went to the Lord, every time I was in a meeting with administration where we didn't see eye to eye and I was discouraged, what I would do is I would sit. There was a chapel at the time, which is now a coffee shop, ironically, because it's like an evangelization hub in the front part of Newman now. But I would sit in that chapel and legitimately just come before the Lord of where do I go now? And I always felt peace in showing back up the next day. And I feel like in my life, I have seldom left, but I know people that have left in a way that's that's powerful. One of the things I think is a benefit of Damascus is none of us have left. Like a lot of times when people ask me of the success here, I think that's one of the things is we've had plenty of tension. I mean, even at this table or expounded out to this office, but they've stayed. So back to the Buckeye Catholic thing, I think I was showing up every day and I was going where the peace was. And even on the days where I was frustrated, I knew that if I left, I would be leaving in chaos and I'd be leaving in not the fruits of the Spirit. And if you're leaving not in the fruits of the Spirit, you're not leaving at the right time. There's just, if God's calling you to leave, he's going to provide the context for leaving that are appropriate to his presence. And if he's calling you to stay, he's going to provide those in that realm. And for me, it was always clear that he wanted me to stay. And then I also went back to something my dad told me in high school, which is don't always be convinced that the measure of your life is based on the success you have now, but off the success that those who follow you have. And now when I look back at Buckeye Catholic and all of the things that are happening now, I give great glory to God that he continued to have me stand in the gap and lay my life down the best.
That's why they've got the statue of you.
Ironically, they do have the crucifix that I advocated for having. But
your the corp. Yeah. Oh man, I can't wait. I can't wait till we have statues of Brad all over.
Yeah, I can wait.
One day, God willing.
I can wait.
Yeah. The parish named Saint John Bradley of Damascus.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys for listening. This was fun. We just canonized Brad and
prematurely.
Hey, if you're listening to this and you have a friend who's like struggling in a position they're in, and they don't know if they should stay or leave, share this with them and then encourage them in that and walk with them through that, so that they feel built up. You've been listening to Beyond Damascus, a show where encounter meets mission. We want people to encounter the living God and then go out on mission to share the word of God with others. A small, simple mission could be to like and subscribe and share this podcast with others, because we're answering questions that everyday Catholics have about how to live a missionary lifestyle in your everyday life. So thanks so much for your participation in this. We'll see you next week. And remember,
Mission makes
sense. CENTS, because we throw pennies in a jar.